Welcome to another exciting edition of Annulment Proof. So it's not just me by myself in my echo chamber talking to the mirror about what I think about NFP. Okay, we brought in, actually somebody was sending me letters once approving of what I was saying and appreciating it. Father Noiseux, a diocesan priest, Novus Ordo from Springfield, Massachusetts. He's a retired priest, and he graciously agreed to come on the show and talk a little about NFP and related topics and the history thereof in his mind and what's been going on with church politics, etc. And I thought just talking to him would be a great idea because, again, people accuse me of just coming up with all this stuff out of the blue and nobody agrees with me and I never talk to anybody. Truth is, I can't really talk to anybody that's current in the church today because for political reasons. The answer is no comment. We're not going there. But because Father Noiseux is retired, I think that has something to do with it. And he's also a man of conviction and conscience. So he's going to say what he's going to say because God's number one. Father Noiseux, would you tell us briefly about your career and where you came from and what kind of priest are you? And then we can talk a little about how you came to make some conclusions similar or identical to mine regarding natural, quote unquote, natural family planning.
As you mentioned, I'm a diocesan priest, Springfield, Mass, and I was what is called a delayed vocation because before entering the seminary, I had taught elementary school and public schools for 10 years. And even before I entered the seminary, I had always wanted to be a priest. It's a long story as to how I got delayed with the 10 years. But ultimately, I did enter the seminary and was ordained in 84. So that was coming on 42 years ago. And I'm 77 years old. And sometimes I help in a parish, depending upon which parish it is, because each parish has its own personality today. So I don't feel comfortable in each possibility. I don't know how to celebrate the Latin Mass, and it's something that would very much interest me. Years ago, I had tried that. Someone was helping me, and I found it very difficult for many, many reasons because it's quite an arduous undertaking. But anyway, ever since I was a child, I had a natural aversion to contraception when I first learned about it when I was 10 or 12 years old, because it amazed me to consider that a man and a woman could, by the decision they make, prevent a life from coming into existence that otherwise would have come into existence. So I always consider that that was wrong. I think it might have been around the same time that I did learn that it was the teaching of the church. And in those days, in the 50s and 60s, we had a very clear understanding of the authority of the church as speaking with the mind of Christ. This was before the council, which took place in the exact 4 years I was in high school, 62 to 66. So 62, 3, 4, and 5, those 4 years of the beginning.
Careful banging your hands on the table because it comes through the microphone. Okay. Careful with what you move your hands. Yeah, go ahead.
Those 4 years coincided with the Second Vatican Council. So during the time that I was in the seminary, the concept of contraception was never spoken of at all. I heard the word once during a canon law course, and I can't remember as to what context it was in. One of my classmates had inquired of me how it was that natural family planning was any different from contraception, and I was not able to answer that question. However, the whole natural family planning agenda was so heavily promoted that it seemed certainly as if this was magisterial. And there was a tremendous avalanche of publicity and propaganda promoting and supporting it. So when I was first ordained, I did have the notion, I really was convicted that the whole question of contraception was the most important moral question because everything else hinged on it. But at the same time, I didn't appreciate the problems with what is called natural family planning. Soon after my ordination, a young lady had called inquiring as to whether or not I would be interested to learn about what natural family planning is. She was calling priests of the diocese for this intention, so I said, certainly. She came to the rectory We had a very nice conversation. She was promoting the advantages of natural family planning, and we were hearing those statistics, which are often repeated, that 90% of the people or more who practice natural family planning have successful marriages. And she suggested that I might take the courses that were offered in the diocese. So I went to 2 of the 3 classes. For some reason, I missed one of them. It wasn't intentional, but I had not been able to go. And I noticed that while I was there at those classes, there were people I recognized who I knew were not necessarily what you would call traditionally minded Catholics, in the sense that I don't think that the notion of contraception would have been a problem or an issue with them. But it was clear to my mind that they were attending the classes because they wanted to avoid the use of chemicals and the pill, which could have harmful side effects. So this was seen as a natural way of practicing, as they call it, natural family planning. Fast forward some years later, and a married couple that I knew tried to attend the classes because they were very much trying to conceive a child without success. And they had hoped that by attending the natural family planning classes, they would maximize the possibility of conception. But they withdrew from the classes because, according to their thinking, it was an occasion of sin. Anyone who has the slightest knowledge of the natural family planning procedures recognizes the necessary requirements of investigating the wife's situation so as to make various determinations. Seems very, very artificial with all of these thermometers and checking other things that we.
Okay, and this is about what year were you thinking these thoughts?
Okay. First of all, it was in the early 80s that I was convicted that natural family planning must be perfectly permissible because so many churchmen were promoting it. But this most recent case of the people that I knew who were trying to conceive was only several years ago, where they had attended natural family planning classes. Now, I had here a little pastoral letter to Catholic couples by the Bishop of Lincoln, Nebraska in 1991, who was Most Reverend Glennon P. Flavin. And this type of information was very, very typical in those days. And on page 7 of this little booklet, the bishop says, across our diocese, 8 natural family planning centers for teaching our Catholic couples have been established, and plans are underway for establishing additional centers, trained teachers staff each of these centers, and it goes on. So over and over, there was the couple-to-couple league, and this was promoted very, very aggressively by the couple-to-couple league, the natural family planning phenomena. So it was only very gradually, and I don't know how. It wasn't because I read anything. It wasn't because I came across a convincing article, but I was becoming increasingly suspicious of it. So an important event was perhaps 10, 12 years ago, I was giving a talk for some adults whose children were at religious education class. And during the time that they were at religious education class, I gave a talk on Humanae Vitae. And as I left the room where the talk was given, a young father approached me on the parking lot and he said, "Father, I noticed that you never spoke about natural family planning in your talk." And I said, "Well, because you asked me, I'll tell you, I have problems with it." I said, "Maybe we can go into the rectory and talk." So he came in with me and we spoke for about an hour. And this young man gave the most eloquent apologetic for divine providence and trusting in divine providence. And it was a complete contradiction of the methodology and the philosophy of natural family planning. Interestingly, I ran into this young man about a year ago, and at that time I had only newly been introduced to your channel. I came across it because of the algorithm, I guess.
Yeah.
And I started watching, and then I went and watched back episodes. So I said to this man at a picnic, a parish picnic, "Do you remember when you and I had that conversation, the one I just referred to about?" And he did not recall the conversation. So I just briefly outlined what he had said to me. And then I asked him a question: "Do you still believe what you explained to me then. Now, by now, he has like 8 or 9 children. And he said, I don't know. I think the point of it all is that it's not easy. It's not easy. Now, here I have, that segs into something.
When you say it's not easy, what do you mean exactly?
It's not easy to abandon natural family planning and to entirely surrender yourself to the providence of God. I'm not suggesting that.
Oh yeah, correct. It's not. It's called the after the fall. That's what you got to do.
Now here's
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. I listened about a year or two ago to an interview with William F. Buckley, who in my youth was considered a conservative. We realized later he was a false opposition. But he was interviewing Malachi Martin, who I realize is a controversial figure. But aside from that, Malachi Martin has said many solid things. And it was after the death of Paul VI, Pope Paul VI. So this would have been like September of 1978. And William F. Buckley had Malachi Martin on his firing line program. It's on YouTube. You can find it there easily enough. And during the interview, of course, the question comes up. William F. Buckley asks of Malachi Martin, do you think with a new pope, who had not yet been chosen, that the church will change her teachings on contraception? Now, natural family planning did not come up into that conversation, but I transcribed myself by replaying the segment several times. I'm going to read for you what Malachi Martin said. The doctrine of the Catholic Church is going to stay, the prohibition against contraception. It's a hard doctrine. It's a very difficult doctrine, but it does go against one or two impulses we all take for granted today, that I have a right to sexual pleasure without any responsibility. It's taken for granted today. So why interfere with me, with your laws, with your contraceptive laws? And it's taken for granted that a woman has a right to her body, which nobody denies, but she hasn't got the right to the body of a baby, or as they call it, a fetus, which is a more impersonal way of speaking about the baby that you're going to cut out. But the law is very hard. The law of Christianity and the law of Jesus, which says that you don't need sexual pleasure. By itself, you don't need it. And if circumstances are such that you can't have it without committing sin, then you can't have it. It's a very hard law. And it seems to me that at the beginning, when Humanae Vitae was promulgated, I recall that the takeaway was the church is affirming her stance that contraception is not allowed. It seems to me, if we were to go back to that time period and review what was being written and spoken of, the natural family planning wasn't so immediately aggressive. And you know who does well with this kind of research is the gentleman whose channel you've been on, Ascent to Mount Carmel. He's very good. And he goes back and he finds old newspaper articles from diocesan newspapers and such, which help us to put things into a different perspective.
He has a special account that he pays for, so he can go find all the old articles, and he's given me some interesting stuff. But that guy, I forget his name right offhand, but I've been on there a few times. But anyway, you were saying.
As a matter of fact, as a parenthesis, I think that he changed his thinking on one issue because of what you had said, and he admitted it to you on the channel.
Right, it's in the water. It's in the water. It's kind of like we all drive on the left side, on the right side of the road, right? No, it's not. We're all driving on the wrong. You're like, what are you talking about? See? Okay, well, hang on a minute. That's all interesting stuff. And yes, it is tough to kind of make the change, like you were talking about the guy you met at the picnic or whatever 10 years later. However, when you know something is true, when you can become convicted of that, then it's easier to make the leap. Kind of like when you followed your vocation to priesthood. That wasn't like falling off a log easy, right? It was the hound of heaven. And it's like, hey, Noiseux, I got some plans. You're like, whoa, what are you talking about? This is crazy. This is crazy. Like, well, it's not actually. So you did that. But once you kind of decided, okay, you could become a priest, but most normal, quote, normal people can't just become a priest. It's too much. So similarly with this, you're having to cut off your NFP. In other words, you're going to trust providence, and you're not going to plan, and you're to do something like that isn't that hard if you know that it's true. Then you put all your eggs in the basket of truth and you ask for grace. And this is what everyone did until the 20th century. But if you open the door to a new to an alternative to plan A, then people will take it when it gets hard. Kind of like, oh, I don't know, you can do priesthood light if you need to. If it gets too hard for you, we have a priesthood light pastoral innovation for you. You can get a little girlfriend now and then if you need, or if you want to do something different, then that's fine, because it's for grave reasons, right? People will do it. Now, I hear what you're saying about Malachi Martin. Father Malachi Martin was explaining that people want the pleasure without the procreation. And it seems to me, you were saying earlier when we were talking before we had the technical difficulties, that Humanae Vitae caused an uproar when it came out. And I'm thinking the only reason it would cause an uproar was because everyone was already had the NFP is Catholic, NFP is natural mindset, which means we don't need to pursue procreation anymore. So Casti Connubii didn't cause an uproar, but Humanae Vitae did, because in the interim years, the Pope has started to say, well, you can a little NFP for grave cause is okay, is good, whatever. Now we have uncoupled procreation from the act. So this is why it just seems that that's why I keep saying, until NFP is put in its proper place of violating nature, we are always going to have contraception and everything else that goes with violating nature, because from the appearances, the church violates nature. So why can't we? That was those are the, when you follow connect the dots. But I wanted to, I know you have more to say, but continue. And then I kind of want to try to bring it in to how did you get to the conclusion that you are, and how do you square this being a diocesan priest? Because you're the only guy that that's a priest that says what you're saying. Is that about right?
That's a good question. I would expect that that's probably the case, because natural family planning is so part and parcel to Catholic life. However, having said that, I expect that a lot of individuals, clergy and lay people who call themselves Catholic, don't have any problem with any kind of contraception at all. And part of that, everything we're talking about has layers and layers of reality linked to it. And this book I came across a few weeks ago, a month ago or more. I think it was on Steve Cox's channel where the author was being interviewed. This is a definitive guide to Catholic fasting and abstinence, but there's a part that especially pertains to what we're talking about, and it's a brief paragraph I'll read to you. But before doing that, I've often thought, in watching you, I could say, John Farrell has a medieval mind. Now, the word medieval has been co-opted by the enemy, so that medieval is thought to be someone behind the times, someone who hates progress, someone who wants to live in the past. But in my mind, when I speak of someone having a medieval mind, it's a person who thinks in faith. They're living their life according to faith, according to the supernatural order. And what you often say is something that you don't hear said too often. You want to go to heaven. And there are certain choices a person can make that will cause them to lose that great prize. And so part of the difficulty is that all of us have bought into the new reality. Dr. Douglas Hagen, who has the channel Dr. Deep State, speaks of our living in a simulacrum, an artificial world. We're further and further away from the medieval ideal, which had Christ as the center of our attention and the the motivating factor of our life. So in every aspect, the church in her practices has kind of gradually dumbed things down. Okay, this is a section from the book I just mentioned, The Definitive Guide to Catholic Fasting and Abstinence, second edition. And on page 39, abstinence from sexual activity in Lent. Through the Middle Ages, the faithful also abstained from sexual relations during the whole of Lent, as evidenced by birth records showing a drastic decrease in births 9 months after Lent. In Spain, now this is very interesting what is coming next. In Spain, the custom of abstaining from sexual relations was widely practiced, the custom of refraining from sexual practice, well into the mid-1900s, and did not widely end until the completion of Franco's rule. While not part of Roman Catholic fasting rules, the Eastern Orthodox Church continues to require abstinence from sexual relations during Lent. Now, just a few things there. First, on Franco. Franco was always portrayed as an evil man, as a villain, as a fascist, whatever else you can imagine. And just in the last year or two, that Valley of the Fallen in Spain has been decimated. That was built to honor the Spanish Civil War soldiers. But Franco is always portrayed as someone very bad. But how interesting that according to this, even until the reign of Franco, it was the custom in Spain for people to hold from sexual activity during Lent. Our modern sensibilities has us believe that sex is absolutely and totally necessary for any kind of contentment in this life, that without it, a person isn't healthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're so far now from the medieval mind, which had a supernatural vantage point, that we want to be comfortable. I was recently reading a book.
I'm going to jump in for a second real quick. So yes, if you, again, NFP is not in a closed box. Its ripple effect goes everywhere. And that has to do also with the purpose of the conjugal act. So if it is no longer, if it's natural to be non-fertile, that means that this all touches into if the consecration at Mass is a representation of Calvary, then the conjugal act is a representation of your vows. You're reenacting your vows and all this. In other words, so now you have Father Mike Schmitz saying, the more conjugal acts, the holier you get. That's what he says. And he says St. Thomas Aquinas says that, which is kind of says the opposite. He's like, no, celibacy is the holiest you get. And you can excuse the conjugal act, but that's not what, this is why Franco and the tradition of the church would say to put limits on the thing, or to realize that this is not an end in itself, okay, other than for procreation. So again, if it's nature to pursue sterility, then to pursue the secondary ends is good, and therefore it necessarily, in a kind of, it's very difficult to articulate this, but you become a more Christopher West, and that you need your theology of the body. You have to apply theology and a spiritual reality to this conjugal act. It's like a spiritual reality to eating a piece of pizza. You have to stretch, but there might be one if you can, but that's not what it's about. Okay. So this is, and it become like you were talking about with NFP. It sounds so good when NFP is introduced or talked about, that it just mesmerizes basically everybody. And unless you have an antidote to it, you go right along with the flow, which is kind of what you and I both did when we started hearing about it. We thought, well, the church taught it. And, but that just hit me this morning when I think it was the first reading or something, we were talking about the Mass is the representation. I forgot where I read it this morning of Calvary. And so again, you hear lots of times that the conjugal act is a reinstatement of your vows. And this is because we have to keep on consenting all the time because the vows are now perpetual consent. I'm sort of digressing a little bit, but that was my main comment with what you just said is the thrust, the purpose of the conjugal act has changed in everyone's mind. And so to try to put that genie back in the bottle is no one's going to want to go there, which is why I think you were saying you're probably the only priest that thinks like you think. Now, when you do, and I don't want to cut you off midstream, I want to remember what you were saying, but when you do talk to other priests and you talk to them about this, what do they say?
Well, here's what happens. We often socialize with people that are on our wavelength. And I do remember having said to a priest last year that I thought the fundamental, most important question of the day was contraception. And he said, I agree totally. What do we do about it? But we hadn't gotten into the greater particulars as to the whole natural family planning aspect of it all, because I think that, again, it's been so heavily promoted. But I want to say this while I remember, because you had spoken about this misquotation appropriated to St. Thomas Aquinas regarding a couple becoming holier to the greater degree that they engage in the marital act. And you said that wasn't an actual quote, which I, of course, do believe. But you said something else in that context. You said the default position for Catholic marriage is, and I think you used the word continence. And the point that you were making was that sexual activity is not the default, if you will, because let's face it, if it were true that the more sexual activity even a married couple were to have, the happier they would be, then because of all of this contraception going on, then marriages should be very, very strong with this false logic. Now, at the very beginning of this explosion, I think there were people of goodwill who fooled themselves into believing that somehow contraception would strengthen marriages and such and such and such. But in short order, we discovered it's the exact opposite, because we have a fallen nature. And so nothing created is able to satisfy us, in the same way that it's difficult to stop eating chocolates once we begin. Not to be comparing something on a higher level as the gift of sexual procreation, but it can become very addictive. I'd listened to a conference by Father John Hardin some years ago, and he was talking about how it's true that sexual activity can become incapable of satisfying the desires of the individual because of our fallen nature, and that ultimately such an excess always leads to murder. And I don't think he was speaking only about abortion, which is certainly a consequence of the misuse of the faculties God has given us, but also to darker things that we not go into. But I don't understand how it is that certain people can try to mislead others into thinking that somehow an increase of conjugal activity can create to a deeper affinity with one another, not to be a Manichaean and deny that God has given it to us as something good, but it's hard for us with our fallen nature to use all of these gifts in right measure. It's
there's that quote from G.K. Chesterton, something like, or it could be C.S. Lewis, I can't remember, but the if you pursue the secondary ends without the primary, you get neither. And if you pursue the primary ends, you get both.
Well, see, that's the basis, I think, of your argument, which I think is irrefutable, that there are primary and secondary ends, and you can't quite put them on the same level. The primary end is the procreation of children and the education of the offspring, which are really two elements.
So everyone, Cardinal Burke, everybody would agree with that. They'd say, oh yeah, there's primary and secondary. And they just say those words, but in practice, everything is primary today. That's how they operate. And that it redounds to annulments. It's all, like I said, the NFP law has ripple effects everywhere. The Catholic Church it's like a perfect Lego set. Everything clicks together perfectly. You move one Lego, it ain't going to fit, and you're going to have to move every other Lego to go with it to keep up appearances, or it's not. That's why you cannot be a cafeteria Catholic. It doesn't work. And that's why sorry?
No, you mentioned Cardinal Burke. This to me is an example of another problem that's associated with everything we're talking about. Namely, it seems to me that today people argue on the basis of what they want the truth to be. For example, there's a priest in Italy, Father Minutella. Now, whether you agree with him or not isn't the point. The point will be clear when I make it. Father Minutella was excommunicated for denying the legitimacy of the election of Jorge Maria Bergoglio. So sometime after his excommunication, Cardinal Burke was in Rome. And as Don Minutella tells the story, Cardinal Burke asked to speak to him. Cardinal Burke wanted to go and speak to this priest who had been excommunicated. So when Cardinal Burke did indeed speak to him, he told the priest that he should go on his knees and beg pardon from Pope Francis, and then spend the rest of his life in seclusion in a monastery making reparation. But here's the thing. Cardinal Burke has a doctorate in canon law. Why did he not explain to this priest, Father, you're wrong about your canonical assertions for reason A, B, and C? Nothing, no explanation, no reason given. And so it seems to me this is typically the way that things are dealt with today. People want to believe a certain thing, and so they don't appeal to the authorities that are the law that's in place even. And I think this is evident in many. For example, Bishop Athanasius Schneider was on the Tim Gordon show a few years ago, and Tim Gordon asked Bishop Athanasius Schneider, do you believe that the entirety of the third secret of Fatima was revealed? And Bishop Athanasius Schneider said, oh yes, because otherwise it would mean that John Paul II hadn't told the truth. And I thought, well, those two things don't add up, because Father Gruner had been asked the same question, and he said, well, Pope John Paul II probably used a broad mental reservation. But what I'm saying is, we have to address the facts, and we have to look at the evidence, and we can't make our desire fit what's there. And I think that's how you're different in all of this, because you do tend to, you always try to get right to the heart of it. And it's interesting because your channel isn't that big, but you've been on a lot of high-profile programs. Theo Howard had you on. That was a very good episode.
Yeah.
And,
actually, as far as I've been basically, nobody wants me on their show. Like there's a lot of people who have these YouTube channels. A lot of people want guests. That's what they want. They're always looking. So to someone who's saying what I'm saying, which is nobody, they would think, well, that would be good. Let's talk to him. But it can't really be refuted, because it has ripple effects. It comes right back to your front door. Pretty much everybody, either because of things they're doing personally, or because of annulment, and or other politics. We can't touch this thing. Just like if you were going to give us, let's say, I don't know, increase and multiply was in the readings at Mass. So you decided to say that this is no longer a binding precept in the New Testament, and there's no duty to reproduce. Therefore, there are no exceptions to the nature of the act, and this is why NFP is intrinsically unnatural. If you said something like that at Saint so-and-so parish, what would happen to you within the next 2 hours?
we know the answer to that.
But if you're retired, what would happen? What could you can't, do you still have to keep your head down?
Well, here's the thing. There's a big advantage to being a pastor in a parish because you can slowly inform the people. For example, if you arrive as a pastor, you don't want to immediately start with very difficult things your first weekend, because once the people get to know you, they have a certain confidence in you, they'll be more open to the things you have to say. They've come to assess you, so to speak. And so you can introduce these things, I think, in a very clear and effective way. But when you're filling in for anyone, here's one of the problems. Aside from the fact that if you were to bring up some hard question like that, perhaps you wouldn't be invited again, which is fine. But also, the people are so uninformed. It's like teaching someone a high math concept without their having any prerequisites. And so all the things that you talk about are somewhat weighty. And I think you present them in a very clear way. And I think you're a good teacher, but it's not the kind of thing where, look at, I've listened to dozens of your videos and I've listened to many of them 2 or 3 times, because you really, are very incisive in going into the heart of little misspeakings people make in trying to avoid the question and so forth. So imagine 10, 15 minutes at a homily one Sunday where people have no concepts as a starting point. I think those things would be necessary for adult education.
It can be. Yeah, I see what you mean. It can be tricky. Of course, since this is natural law, your average toothless farmer should be able to catch on. However, he's been deprogrammed. He's been brainwashed so much, like we all have, that it can be. So I guess this is the hard part, because everyone knows the Catholic Church has always approved of NFP. That's what everybody knows. So if you say anything contrary, you're automatically dismissed. It seems to me every priest is handcuffed. He cannot even say anything against the new orthodoxy because A, he's wrong, B, he's politically in trouble with his bishop immediately. Because when a priest opens his mouth against this, the bishop will get the memo within 10 minutes. Don't you think?
Maybe 15.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yes. No, I've heard of those things. And I also know of YouTube videos where priests aggressively promote an alternative lifestyle, to put that in quotation marks, and that's fine. So there's a double standard with how priests are monitored, if you will.
Okay. So before you ever saw any of my videos, which I think I've been on the YouTube for like a year and a half or something like that.
Oh, that recently. So I caught you kind of at the beginning then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, because I've been saying a lot of things on Facebook and Twitter, and basically everyone, all the kind of cool people out there that are Catholic have blocked me. So I'm basically kind of into the void a little bit. Like every Catholic Inc. person, pretty much, they either completely ignore you or they block. Most of them block. Same with Twitter. So I thought I'll have to get started on YouTube, because I think this is important. I know it's important. It's only the definition of marriage, which means the building block of Western civilization, or every civilization. If you can't have that, you're hosed. And so we have to peel back this propaganda, but no one else can kind of go there, or very few people, unless you have no political ties and you have the knowledge. And there's just not a lot of people who have both of those. And so when I even talked to my FSSP priest, I think privately, I think he more or less communicates between the lines that he gets it, but he can't really touch that. The pastor, not so much. They're kind of locked into NFP, and I think it affects a lot of things, of course. But this is 2026. So in what year did you kind of think to yourself, I need to change, or something's not right with my acceptance of NFP or anywhere on the spectrum? How did that happen for you?
I think it was late on, because I have an awareness, at least, of at least of 10 or 12 years because of that situation that I described, where the young man asked why I hadn't spoken natural family planning, and I explained it was because I had problems with it. But I don't think it was only at that point, but it was later in the game. I've been around a long time, and we don't hear of these things spoken of too often. This is a topic that, other than for you, I don't think is mentioned too often on any YouTube channel, except for someone promote. Oh, I've been introduced to some wild people through watching your things,
Yeah.
because some of them are really over the top with their wild presentations. But those would be the more typical ones. So I think, how did that happen? It's got to be grace. It's got to be grace. Because, again, here's the other thing amongst many. I came across a book years ago that Ignatius Press had printed. I didn't read the book, but I remember reading the explanation of it. Maybe I came across this book 20 years ago. And the book explained how it was that in the United States, since the time of the Civil War, legislation had always worked against family life. And so that's another element working behind the scenes. In order for people to practice the truth, it's helpful, if not necessary in some cases, to have a certain structure that's going to help them. Dorothy Day, who I know is controversial and I think often unfairly trashed, had said, we want to make the world so that it is easier for people to be good. And it's not easy for people to be good now because everything wages war against them. So the whole industrialization thing, like take feminism, for example. I can't imagine that having been even a consideration in the days when men had to be out in the yard doing the brute work, the labor, and the women were in the home. I don't think there was any attraction for switching roles in that case. But when you get to the point where you want to find gratification by your occupation, like being a magazine editor or have some plaque on your door, then you have a new element introduced that never was the case. My theory is that the whole industrialization thing was behind the scenes, orchestrated especially by the enemies of Christ, because original sin demands that the woman, as you often mention, will save herself by childbearing, and the man by earning his keep by the sweat of his brow. So everything that technology offers is an attempt to escape the arduous fact of life that this is a valley of tears. And we as Catholics have bought into the middle class ideal of comfortable living, being like everyone else, except with a few little add-ons here and there. And what you're talking about requires real conviction, real faith, real courage, and yet everything around us is pushing us in the opposite direction. We want that comfort. We want that to have both our cake and eat it too, as the saying used to go.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said about Dorothy Day, how we want to try to make things easy, make life easier to be good. And you're right. When the red carpet essentially is laid out for an exit ramp to be good, then a lot of people will take it, especially when everyone in the church says this is good, this is okay. And boy, oh boy. Let me launch into my next topic, I guess, and I might as well just do it by bringing this. I'm going to push pause while I get this up. So, back to bring the medieval mind into the video here, and also trying to make life easier for people. Let's go to 1 Timothy 2, Father Noiseux, and I want you to kind of tell me what you think this means, and not what you think it means, but what does the church teach it means, because we cannot have 9 Bibles and 9 different interpretations of the Bible. There's only one. So this is after the fall. Adam is going to have to work, and then it talks about what Eve is going to have to do since she ate the fruit too. And I'll just read it, and then tell me what does this mean, please? So Adam was okay. So they talk about what's going to happen now after the fall. She shall be saved through childbearing if she continue in faith and love and sanctification and with sobriety. So she's going to not be saved if she doesn't do those things. So are these subjective? Is this ironclad? What is the point of this verse? What does it mean?
Yet she shall be saved through childbearing if she continue in faith and love and sanctification with sobriety. The question I would ask before we continue, how would you interpret sobriety in this sentence?
I suppose not getting drunk, the obvious thing.
Yeah, see, we all tend, I'm concluding myself first and foremost, to try to read too much. Yeah, that's the immediate meaning that I would expect too, because St. Paul does make reference to drunkenness and the requirements of a bishop and all of that. But I imagine, not to take anything away, it could also be a certain seriousness of life, a certain measure. Yeah, but I think it says what you interpret it to say over the course of your videos, which is that a necessary requirement, and yet I say a necessary requirement to be saved through childbearing, but as also you've indicated, it's not a duty to childbear. So there are cases where someone could have a Josephite marriage, so that would be a rare exception, I think. But childbearing is something that is not to be avoided.
What if, sorry, okay, but it says if she continue in faith and love. So what if she feels that she needs to avoid childbearing because her faith tells her so, and it's a more loving thing, aka we can use NFP because she's reaching out in faith using her NFP, and she's going to be able to love her current children better because with NFP she can control her, she can be more responsible. So that's what this means. She's going to go to heaven now because she is using NFP with faith and love, and she's feeling sanctified, and she's not drinking too much, and she feels fully on board with what she's doing. So does NFP contradict this in the slightest?
Yes, the thing is, we cannot appropriate a subjective interpretation to the words that have objective meaning. And so undoubtedly, not being a scripture scholar by any means, I'm sure that faith here indicates that which has been handed down, received, and believed, and taught by Christ ultimately. So it's not a subjective feeling or sense or something that is appropriate for me, but not for someone else. So
hold on, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. Okay, I'm back. I had a little interruption. We had to deal with some tire customers, but you were telling us about 1 Timothy 2, and I think it's it's definitely one where when you look at what it means on the internet, there's 9 different interpretations, and some are feminist and some aren't. But help us kind of boil it down to, I think I asked the question, does NFP contradict or counter what's being said here? And you said yes, and you were articulating why.
Well, first of all, we have to believe what the church has always believed and always taught. And so we can't take any vocabulary word and appropriate a subjective meaning to it, because it's quite clear that faith and love refer to faith, believing that which has been taught and handed down, taught by Christ, handed down the apostolic teaching, and love would be the love of God and neighbor for the love of God. So we can't turn this into some kind of subjective reality.
You know what you just said is, I'm sorry, that is so good. It makes it so easy. We cannot start changing the definition of the words to get it to mean what we want. It sounds so basic, but yes, faith means one thing. There's only one faith. We don't say that, oh, that person everyone of a different faith. Like, no, there's just one faith, and then love is the willing the good of the other. So that makes it very. You're right, and this is another reason, I guess, that the Bible means what it says, and the words must be interpreted literally, unless the church says no, they're not to be interpreted literally at this time or whatever. So, in other words, the plain meaning of the text. Correct. So, sorry to jump in, but I just thought that was so good. And then I want to try to talk about, and you tell me, why does NFP, is it contrary to what's being said? But I continue. Sorry.
While you had to go out for the customer, I just picked up this book, which I hadn't known that I had bought. It was one of those print on demand things. So I've got it. I bought it in March of 2022 before I had known of your channel. So while you were gone, I was just picking it up. It's called, perhaps you're familiar with it, The Case Concerning Catholic Contraception by Michael Malone.
Right. Yeah, I have that.
So he says here on page 129, I'm skipping past the paragraph previous, surely this is a classic description of NFP. It has become, quote, the art of sinning in a subtle way, unquote. And
that's exactly what I said. And I wonder who got that first. I think he did, but I came to the exact same conclusion by myself when going through Casti Canubi. And then it's 108, the art of, because they're showing it. They're saying, look, all you Christopher West people out there who's trying to find the love in the act, blah, blah. It's so virtuous to do this act, but it's why it makes sense. The act of sinning in a subtle way. I showed that to my pastor at FSSP. He's like, oh no, that doesn't mean it has nothing to do with NFP, you know?
See, and this follows immediately after a mention of Casti Canubi. Yeah, so it's in the same context that you must have been referring to. But, you know, everything that we speak about involves all kinds of tangential and important topics. For example, John Paul II having talked about mutual submission. So how do you deal with that? You know, it's a
right. Are you against the church? Are you against a saint? Or do you know more than a saint? How do you deal with that? It is very tough. I was talking to my daughter and she's like, well, look, it's in the catechism. Why don't we just do the catechism? What are we supposed to do? So your average person, your average Catholic is like, hey, if it's in the catechism, we're doing it. So, and the catechism is a sure norm, and a norm is not objective. A norm is a collection of thought or a prevailing opinion or whatever. So it's like, it is pretty tough, I suppose, for people to do the right thing, quote unquote, because the wrong thing is now so identified as Catholic that you can't really, I think God will give people a lot of grace as far as judgment goes, because there's so much that seems super Catholic today that's not. And this is one of them. But okay, so 1 Timothy, let me get it back again. 1 Timothy 2. I want to see if I can get all of us on the screen. How did I do that before? I can't remember. Oh well, we'll try. Let me see. I don't know how to do it. Anyway, it says she should be saved through childbearing if she continue in faith, love, and sanctity. So basically, it seems to me the main thing that this says is she shall be saved through childbearing if she continue. Right? Because God says, I will multiply your conceptions, right?
That sounds good.
So if she doesn't continue, it seems to me that if she continues with the conjugal act but doesn't continue with childbearing, then there's a disconnect there. Obviously.
Well, it reminds me of I think it's in Ezekiel when the prophet is talking for God, that a person could do all kinds of virtuous deeds, but then at the end, if they turn away, all of their virtuous deeds will be forgotten. But on the other hand, if someone lived a bad life and then they turn toward the good at the end, that will be sufficient for them to be saved. So the point is, perseverance is always necessary. It has to be not just an intermittent fidelity to what's required, but it has to be of long duration, persevering until the end. I fought the good fight. I've run the race. And that's, again, see, part of the problem, as you well know, because you've mentioned it many times too, is the fact that I think today the necessity of grace has been completely de-emphasized, so that it's seen to be, oh, these teachings are much too difficult. No one can endure them. We're too weak. We're too fragile. So God understands, go for it. Whereas my grace is sufficient, Christ teaches us. And so we receive grace if we ask for it. But if we don't even believe that it's necessary for us to have grace to do the good, then we won't ask for it and we won't receive it.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole elimination of grace as of absolute necessity is very, very prominent. Now, I don't know if you know that in Rome in September, a Monsignor, I think his name is Savino, gave the homily for the LGBTQ event that was at I think it was the Gesù in Rome. And he said, you can watch it on YouTube with the auto translate feature, because of course he's speaking in Italian. He's saying that, with science, we have a deeper perspective now, and people should be able to have sexual relations with whoever they want. The law doesn't mean anything. I'm not exaggerating his meaning. It's even perhaps more stark than I've just articulated, but it's right there for everyone to see. This is someone speaking in Rome. He wasn't censored in the slightest. So the average person is so confused. But again, I think sometimes we believe what's convenient for us. And I might ask you the question, at what point did you come to appreciate, or was it always that there was a problem with natural family planning?
Well, my wife decided to impose natural family planning after our first baby, and she came home with the idea. Somehow she went to a seminar or something, and I'm like, well, okay, happy wife, happy life. And if this is what she wants, and I guess in the back of my mind, I'd heard of it, and okay, I guess we'll do that. But it didn't seem right. I'm like, why are we doing this? What's the problem? What's going on here? But that's kind of what she wanted to do. And then it was so ubiquitous, as we all know, that every Catholic knows NFP is like the good, high-minded, responsible, loving thing to do. And every husband wants to do that. Every husband naturally just wants their wife happy. That's what they want. So if she's thinking this, and I think a lot of the wives want this because it can be hard or challenging or whatever to have those 17 kids, like 1 Timothy 2 says, you must continue. And she's like, oh no, well, we have a way out of this now. And so again, when things get tough, you're gonna take an exit if given one. Here, you've been working hard for 5 hours. Why don't you take a 4-minute break, have a little drink of water here. Oh no, can't do, so of course you're going to do that. So then I remember, I guess, thinking that, well, because the church allows it, then it's got to be only as difficult, or you have to avoid it only like avoiding mass on Sunday, for a grave cause. And then I started then, I remember reading the Bible from cover to cover, just the Douay Rheims, and in the commentary it says no, there's no precept to increase and multiply. That's Protestant.
The Haydock one?
Not only Haydock, but this wasn't the Haydock one. It was just the regular Douay Rheims. They both say the same thing. And I thought, oh yeah, I didn't know that. Okay. So I started connecting the dots like that and started catching on that, and I think that kind of helped me solidify it, actually. But to answer your question, I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I just started to realize that this has to be intrinsically evil, because there's no way to again allow the conjugal act without the nature part. But how do we square it? And I'm trying to remember how I even came to that conclusion. Now that I think of it, I'm just trying to remember how I did. I don't know if I can. It just started to come to me, and then I started reading more, and it seemed to make sense that way. And then again, all of it does fall into, it becomes like I use the analogy of the Catholic Church is like a bunch of Legos that stick together. You cannot have one out of place, or it's all going to be out of place, and it fits perfectly with everything. And then people say, John, are you ever going to write a book? And I'm like, well, I keep learning new chapters of the book every week. There's more to this piece. So I keep getting different information as to support that no, NFP is not natural, because nature has the one purpose. So I'm still trying to answer your question.
Well, I think in a way it's similar to my coming to it. We don't know exactly how it was. It was a kind of organic development. And maybe later on, after this podcast is done, some things will come to your mind that you're not remembering now. But it wasn't as if all of a sudden a light went off. That's for how it was for me. It was a gradual deepening of my...
I think so. And then once it sort of came to me, then I immediately clicked on it. I'm like, this is true. And I started to backfill, like, okay, how come this, and how can it be Catholic if St. John Paul II says, how can NFP not be Catholic if St. John Paul II says it is? Then you start to realize all this about Vatican II and the binding nature, or their lack thereof, and with the faith and morals, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is how NFP is not natural and is not Catholic, but can put on the appearance of, and it's just a really tough sell. But for people with the internet, and there's grace, and with people with the sensus fidelium, they can start to catch on, because I think a lot of people in their heart know that IVF is weird, or contraception is weird, or NFP is weird, or annulment is really Catholic divorce in practice. But how do we believe that when the status quo says that is not true? It's all Catholic. Then you have to kind of step out in faith and be willing to counter. But it's such an uphill battle that you'll have no success, or no mainstream success right away, which is kind of what you were saying. I've been on a lot of channels, not really, a little bit, but I actually have groups of people like, hey, you should have annulment proof on. They're like, no way, buddy. But an overnight success is 10 years in the making. So we'll see whatever comes of it. But as long the internet's going to be forever, I suppose. So we'll get some stuff on here for the record, that there were some voices out there saying this, I do remember being kind of excited though when I started to learn that NFP was not Catholic, because it was like the key that unlocked, because I always was wondering, why are there all these annulments? What is the source of this giant explosion, statistically huge explosion of annulments? This isn't like, well, the people kind of lost the faith and we don't know what no way. It's because the law had been changed. And that was interesting when I finally figured that one out, because you try to pinpoint where's the floodgates, where's the problem and going on in the tribunal with the annulments. You can't do it unless you have knowledge of what's going on, and it's that law that was changed. So now you like you said earlier with 1 Timothy 2, we must use the objective definition of the words. When you start changing the objective meaning, or the objective definition of procreation to include the entire universe, then the annulments can go right through that wide loophole. And goes right back to the NFP. And then I thought, okay, so I can get on the internet and invite challenges and stuff. And it's hard to even get an interlocutor, especially a canon lawyer. I would like to get any canonist, anyone, to come talk to me. We can do it just like this. Anybody. I even have challenges and bets and stuff for them. Like, if you can prove me wrong or whatever, because we want the truth. But again, that the politics are very high. So okay, I guess
There's one thing that came to my mind, just to interject it, in regards to contraception and natural family planning. One element I think that's contributed toward a deeper realization that there's something fishy about natural family planning is that it's often touted as being like 99.9% effective, more so than any other contraceptive device. So it's clear it's being used as a contraceptive technique. And so it's a little dishonest to pretend, as you've often alluded to, oh, we're open to life. But you use the case of going out for the suntan when the sun's not out or something.
Yeah,
like
yes.
that. And
yeah, they'll say it's effective. They'll say it's not, NFP is not contraception because we're not doing anything to the act. Okay. But again, it's not just about, it's the purpose as well as the intrinsic nature. So this is part of why I want to get some of this info out there to give people some of the talking points to counter the barrage of propaganda about it. At any rate, I guess we can wrap this up for now. There's lots more we can talk to. Maybe we'll do round 2. I'll come up with like a list of questions, and but I just thought, again, it was great to have you on, to have someone else that more or less says what I'm saying, that's a Novus Ordo priest. And to make matters worse, you don't even say ad orientem. We'll have to work on that. I can't, to me.
Well, privately, of course, I do.
Oh, yeah. Now, don't you feel a little different facing? Okay, now why do you say mass? Why do you celebrate mass ad orientem privately? Why?
Well, first of all, when you're facing the altar, it requires less space in the room that you're in. I was with a religious community that practiced ad orientem, and there's something quite different about it because, as you already know, the intention is that you are leading the people to God. You are praying to God, not to the people. And just in a practical dimension, you don't have distractions. It's a completely different emphasis. And I think friends of mine have said, if one thing could be changed in the Novus Ordo realm, having the Mass toward the tabernacle or toward liturgical east would really work wonders, because we're celebrating Mass to the people. I remember when I was first ordained, one of the sisters who was associated with the parish in the comment said, "Father, why don't you smile at Mass? You never smile at the altar." Well, why? I mean, do I have to explain? I mean, it should be quite obvious. But again, we've been so twisted in our perceptions because of an onslaught of ideas that are contrary to what the church always understood.
Right. So, like as I say, the practice of the Novus Ordo and stuff, it's a different religion, although it's not. The way you pray is the way you believe. So the original sin is, the original lie is, ye shall be as gods. And it seems to me when you're facing the people, you're telling them they are God. I'm offering this to you. So all you cafeteria Catholics, unite. It's good because, and that's why I always keep my eyes closed when I go to Novus Ordo. I don't want to see the priest facing me, consecrating to me. But another reason why people maybe want to listen to me is because I'm not sede or something else. Okay, I go to Novus Ordo and Latin Mass, and that means I'm not someone who's just not Catholic, who's out there. And you're even a priest that celebrates Novus Ordo, who thinks NFP is not natural. I can't think of another. I don't think there is another guy out there like you, or there may be actually.
No, there are, I'm sure, John. Here's something. I haven't listened to Ann Barnhart too much in the last few years. On one of her episodes, she was trashing in broad strokes the Novus Ordo Church, and whoever was her commentator with her corrected her and said no, and he explained the many admirable people in the Novus Ordo Church. And to her credit, she said, "You're right," and she changed her stance that she had given. So I admired her for that. But I myself have known too many exemplary people in Novus Ordo land, and people who believe in what the church has always taught. I think there are even more than we realize who would believe what you're teaching and preaching as what the church has always taught and preached. But there are many, many exemplary people in the Novus Ordo Church. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to all groups because we're in a total meltdown and it's every man for himself. And I think that God is going to find a way to save anyone who's, first of all, if you take Sedevacantists or SSPX or FSSP or the many splinter groups, all of them believe that Jesus Christ is a divine person. He's God, that he was incarnate, that he established one church, that he established the papacy. And we all believe the same things, but because of the horrible confusion in the church, everybody is grappling with different solutions for them. Dr. Hagen had said not one position that you could take, they all violate the principle of non-contradiction. And for example, Gallicanism is a heresy, so we can't claim to have great veneration of the papacy and yet be criticizing the popes, but we find ourselves out of necessity having to do that. It's a great catch-22, and I don't think anyone in the whole 2,000-year history of the church has had to endure this trial. I think it reminds me of the trial of the angels, where God laid out his plan. He gave the angels an opportunity. Are you going to get on board or not? And then he withdrew. And in a certain sense, there's a kind of darkness, if you will, that God is allowing us to suffer through. And he is the one who will manage in some way to save individuals. But in the separatist church, or however you want to word it, the Sedevacantist groups, of which there are several, the Diamond Brothers and so forth, none of them agree on anything.
Right.
You can't find any two people who agree on anything. So I think that what you do is admirable, because, and that's why I was impressed with you when I first started watching your channel. I think you just try to get to the reality of it. And to a certain degree, it's even separate from the faith, because faith builds on nature. And you have to start with common sense. And that's what you're doing. For example, you cannot have two primary ends. That's not a faith question.
People will look you right in the face and say, "Oh yeah, you can." There's just
so that's very problematic, because where are people being instructed? I never had a good foundation in philosophy or any of those things, logic, but there is a residual common sense that's still there. And common sense would tell you you cannot have two primary ends. But they will bend themselves into pretzels saying, "Oh, yes, you can." So
that's right.
How do you begin? I think we have to realize there are more than a few people who do not want to know the truth. Now, I know that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. But having said that, he has revealed the truth to us, even in many particulars, and some of them are more difficult than others to take, to live. But we have to want to live it, even if it's hard, even if it's inconvenient. And I think today, too many who call themselves Catholics are trying to live by what is convenient. And we're getting to the point where that's not going to be sufficient, because God keeps shaking that cage. And I think that you're on the right side of the argument.
I hope you're right. No, I don't hope you're right. Of course, I believe I'm right. And yeah, God will shake everyone's cage in their own way, in their own time. And the internet, I think, of course, is serious two-edged sword, and it's really good. There's so much we can learn from it. Whereas before, like you said, back in the 70s and 80s, it was just like we were in a kind of a deep freeze on a lot of stuff. It was hard to get to the truth, but that's why I like to bring the receipts with the videos. And I'm glad you watched, and I have been watching, and I appreciate you coming on for sure. You've made some good points, and we'll have to talk again, I suppose, when I get a new topic that maybe we want to kind of unpack here. But anyway, I guess
if I
we
could just end with one thing that you mentioned in a year-old video I watched, and it hit on a pet peeve. And so this gives me an opportunity to end on one of my many pet peeves. But you were talking to, it might have been the gentleman who has the channel of Deutero Comedy. And
comical,
I hadn't heard of him until you introduced me to him. And so I went to his channel and I like what he has. But you said, I think it was on that interview, that Catholics cannot agree to disagree on certain things. And you said, for example, the world is fixed, doesn't move. And when I was a child, and you often mention that the whole all you need is love thing, you use the Beatles as a kind of time frame, which is a good demarcation point. But I think, too, the space age with Sputnik in 57, and then afterwards created a new worldview, too. And it was the notion that the world is now a planet. When I was young, you could say something like, I've been all over the world. Everybody in the whole world knows what Coca-Cola is. I heard that use recently, but they use the planet. All over the planet, everyone agrees what Coca-Cola is. Now, Robert Sungenis teaches, not that he's teaching it, but he reminds us that planets move, the Earth does not. And so all of the supposed traditionalists referred to the world we live in as the planet Earth. And I think because our world is the theater of the incarnation, automatically, unwittingly, we detract from that unique, special privilege which Earth has as the place designed from all eternity for the incarnation to take place. A planet is just any other moving body. It's like the George Jetsons, 1962, meet George Jetson. And so we've changed our whole way of describing the reality that we're in. And all those little things don't seem to be so significant, but when you put them all together, it does create that simulacrum that Dr. Hagen talks about, a false world, a false reality. And that's why you're fighting an uphill battle, because it's not only a question of teaching the truth about this specific topic, but to more readily understand what you're teaching is benefited by a whole constellation of worldviews and understandings which are erased. And people don't have it today.
That erasure is fabricated and can only stand with constant propaganda, because people tend to know that dogs are for petting and catching balls. And if you start having this massive propaganda thing that they're actually for other purposes, it's like it won't hold up eventually. Everyone's going to start throwing the ball again and petting the dog again. Just nature, right? Right. Similarly with the rest of this stuff. But someone's got to say it, or the more people that say it, the more people start to catch on. And then the peasants with pitchforks start forming. And that's kind of what's needed. And at the same time, though, we're called to be faithful, not necessarily successful. So it doesn't matter if you got 2 views or 2 million views or anything, or whatever's going on, whatever. Say what you got to say. So when you have a conviction, if you know you need to say it, there you go. So my job, like yours, everyone else's, is to fight for time to get to do some of this stuff. Because of COVID, I sell more tires now. So I got tire customers out there right now who are just, I got to go get to that right now. Oh,
that's right. You've got those.
Yeah, they're still out there. And I said, hey, you guys are on autopilot. I'll be back in a second. Let me finish up. Anyway, I guess we're going to call it done for tonight. Perfect. Today. It's very good. And I know you wanted to pray and all that. And I said, this isn't necessary. We don't come here to pray because we came here to talk, but we could why don't we sign off with a little prayer? Why don't we do that? I think that would be fine.
The beginning of the incarnation with the Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and the hour of our death.
Amen.
Amen.
God bless you in your work. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Keep fighting the good fight. Bye now.
So don't forget, if you're not against NFP, you're not on the team. So go out there and stay toxic.